Hello and welcome everybody to this pop-up office hour on your weekend. Uh, I do these pop-up sessions periodically when there are interesting weather conditions that are of some significance, and especially when they develop relatively quickly, so that it's a little bit hard to plan out in advance exactly when it would make the most sense to host these pop-up sessions. Today, the focus will be on the ongoing lightning outbreak in parts of California and the fact that unfortunately this is likely to start quite a few fires. In fact, I can already see 3 or 4 significant ones that have been started since this morning in central and southern California. So, talk all about that today, along with the still remarkable long duration, punishingly long duration heat event that has unfolded across much of California and the Southwest over the past week to 2 weeks. The fact that we will get something of a break from that now in the coming days, but it looks pretty likely that it's going to resurge again later this month. Talk about all of that today, plus the escalating wildfire situation out west in general here. Just want to double check that I'm using the right microphone here. It looks like I am, so I think we're in good shape. Wanted to remind folks that this channel is partially sponsored by REASK, a company that is rethinking Earth system risk. All right, folks. So I think what the most interesting thing to start with is probably to take a look at the temperatures and the conditions that we've been seeing recently. So go back and look at the antecedents that sort of set us up for this. Unfortunately, I'm sort of trying to go through the Climate Toolbox tool that is so useful and was the basis for my social media post this week about some of the record heat we've been seeing. That appears to be down, perhaps for maintenance, perhaps because of a website issue, so actually it doesn't look like I can share that with you. In which case, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the degree of anomalousness of this heat wave that we've experienced. As I discussed before the heat wave event began 10 to 12 days ago, one of the things that was very clear from the outset was that this was going to be an exceptionally long duration heat wave characterized by overnight minimum temperatures that did not recover to nearly as cool of conditions as you would expect during most historical heat events. So that's one of the signatures of California heat events outside of perhaps the far southeastern deserts, is that it doesn't stay hot at night. Now during this event we were seeing temperatures that for as much as a week straight didn't drop below 80 degrees at any point in the 24-hour period in certain areas, especially in the thermal belt, in slightly higher elevations in the foothills, but even in places like the Central Valley and some parts of the Bay Area, there were quite a few nights where temperatures remained in the 70s. And so there was not a great deal of overnight temperature recovery, really just no way to cool off unless you have access to active cooling, which essentially means air conditioning or swamp coolers, as the case may be. But really, it's difficult to get your body down to a comfortable or even a safe overnight temperature if those temperatures remain really warm overnight and you live in a building that doesn't have access to air conditioning. This has been a big problem at the beginning of the event, especially because PG&E was shutting off the electricity preemptively due to putative fire risk. It's not entirely clear why these de-energized lines were necessary during a fire weather event that was driven primarily by extreme heat and dryness rather than very strong winds, because ostensibly the idea is that very strong winds can be the cause of fire ignitions if the lines themselves fall down into dry vegetation, or if debris, branches or trees or something like that falls onto the lines themselves. Usually heat doesn't cause that. You need pretty strong winds. So that might be an interesting discussion to have down the road, but it certainly meant that a lot of people who were expecting to have access to air conditioning during extreme heat this summer did not. In some of the places where the power was preemptively shut off, and there were other widespread power outages in some in some areas that were not preemptive, but were just because the infrastructure experienced failures during the heat event. So there were a lot of folks who didn't have access to cooling during this heat wave event. By the way, it's worth mentioning that the city of Houston, Texas, a very large an important American city, but also a quite hot and humid one in the summer, is now entering, in some cases, 5 or 6 days without electricity in an environment where temperatures during the daytime, or certainly apparent temperatures, if you include the humidity and the heat index, are well above 100 degrees. So millions of people there who normally have access to air conditioning do not this week in the wake of the landfalling hurricane, which, although it was quote-unquote only a Category 1 out of 5, it made a direct hit on Houston. The city itself was in the right front quadrant, the most intense part of the storm, and I think the most dangerous legacy of the storm is the wholesale collapse of the power grid there, which has left millions of people exposed without cooling, in many cases without telecommunications. This is something that's familiar to Californians during recent large-scale power outages, is that there are battery backups at cell phone towers that last for a certain period of time, but once you get to day 3, 4, 5 of the power outage, you start to lose telecommunications as well as electricity, cooling, and in some cases even water. The irony, of course, being that there's a lot of water in and near Houston, but in some cases not a drop to drink. So a real crisis continuing in Houston due to lack of power amid extreme heat following a hurricane, different, of course, than California's current situation, where at least there are no large-scale power outages at the moment, and the heat has receded somewhat. But now a new hazard, I think, is emerging, and that's what I really wanted to talk about today, with the dry lightning and the great uptick in wildfire activity during this lull in the heat following the extreme heat we just saw, and perhaps coming before yet another wave of it to come in a week or so. So just how hot has it been? If you're on the beach in California, not all that hot. Warmer than average the last couple of weeks, but nothing too extraordinary for July. But if you've been in inland areas, this is actually the hottest period you may have ever experienced, not only in your life, but also in the lives of your parents or grandparents before you. A number of places in California saw their single hottest day on record at any time of year during this most recent heat wave. Redding, for example, reaching, I believe it was 119 for the first time in recorded history, breaking the record for the number of consecutive and cumulative days above 115, because this is not a short duration heat wave by any means. Many other places approaching or breaking records for a number of days exceeding 105, 110. Reno, I believe, getting close to that record for 105. Ukiah tying its all-time record high temperature as well. Some places in the San Joaquin Valley tying all-time high temperatures. Palmdale and Palm Springs both setting new all-time high temperatures. And then we have Las Vegas, which broke the record for its all-time record high temperature on one day, then broke it again the next day, and then has now experienced temperatures on, I believe, 3 days in the past week that would have exceeded its previous all-time record high on any day in recorded history. Those are the remarkable all-time records broken across the interior Southwest during this period, but there are many other places that shattered essentially cumulative records for overnight warmth, and that includes even parts of the Bay Area and some coastal regions, certainly up in the thermal belt and up in the mountains. So the amount of cumulative warmth has just been record-breaking. This was the warmest late June through early July period on record for most of California and the Southwest, except for the immediate coast. And in a lot of places, this was driven by the magnitude of the extreme overnight warmth to a greater degree than the extreme daily high temperatures, although in many cases those too were record-breaking. It's just that the overnight warmth was even more remarkable and contributed more to the multi-week record-breaking warmth. I can't show you those numbers right now because the tool appears to be down. But in any case, It has been a record warm period. The heat wave continues today, although in slightly reduced form across the west. There will be more significant reduction in that level of heat in the next few days going into early next week. But there are early signs that it could well resurge once or twice even between now and the end of July. So extreme heat risk continuing in the long term, even though there will be a break. Important to note, though, that the break this week will not feature unusually cool temperatures. It will just feature temperatures closer to the typically hot values for mid-July, relaxing to the median or the mean before rising once again to potentially quite high levels. There's a bit of uncertainty regarding just how hot these next waves will get. The European ensemble, often the more reliable weather modeling ensemble, suggesting a significantly more intense heat wave by the end of July, potentially focus more on Southern California and perhaps even hotter there during that event than the recent one. The GFS ensemble still suggesting another major resurgence in severe heat, but a little more broadly distributed. That's still a ways out. I'll have additional sessions to talk about that and maybe a blog post later. So that's all I'm going to say about it today. But I did want to mention that in the context of what we're about to focus on, which is the ongoing dry lightning and surge in western wildfires, because that is occurring on the heels of a sustained period of record-breaking heat, as I mentioned, but also potentially sandwiched in between two periods of severe to potentially even record-breaking heat. So if we do get big fires that pop up right now, they will probably still be burning in many cases when the next major heat wave arrives. So now I am going to share my screen and show some things that I think will be of interest. Just bear with me for a minute here. Okay, so you're going to see a few different things on the screen. First will be, that I want you to focus on, will be the satellite imagery. There we go. This is the west-wide satellite imagery, so this is what you're getting, a top-down view from all the, essentially, so you can see everything from about the Mississippi River westward, including California, of course, in the far western or left part of the picture here. And just trying to make sure that there's not anything that froze here, since it looks like, there we go. Animation coming back up. So there's a couple of interesting things to note here, and let me get my drawing tool out to illustrate this fact. So you can see that right now there is this anticyclonic flow, classic high pressure system, right near the Four Corners region. So that is not unusual. In fact, you can almost encircle the Four Corners and sort of see that the axis of rotation is just like this, as you'd expect it to be this time of year. That's the classic Four Corners high driving the monsoon. And you can see that there is this flux of monsoonal moisture on the southwestern flank of this high, spiraling up across the Great Basin, and also, notably right now, over most of California as well. This is a pretty active summer satellite image for this part of the world, and there is a lot going on here that's of interest. One is you can see all these puffy clouds all the way from the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, the Great Basin, so there's some ones over Las Vegas, the Sierra Nevada, but also down, if you look off the Southern California coast and going up into Central California, those are all convective clouds, meaning deep cumulus clouds capable of producing thunderstorms. In fact, there are thunderstorms in all of these areas right now, including over the coastal waters of Southern California. So I'm going to zoom into that in just a minute here. But the other piece that I wanted to emphasize, that's a little bit less apparent right now. That might be a little more apparent in the sunset view, but there are a lot of wildfires ongoing right now throughout the West that yesterday generated a tremendous amount of smoke. You may be able to see that better in a slightly more northerly view. Not as much apparent up there actually right now either. So let me instead zoom in on some regional sectors here. This is the infrared imagery, and what I want to do is highlight some of the fires that are currently occurring that will become apparent once I can show this. Just trying to get this to... Alright, so here's one fire up in far northern California. That's the Shelley fire, I believe, and that's been burning for a number of days. It's in pretty rugged, remote terrain and burning in some heavier timber, so that is not going anywhere anytime soon. But there are some newer fires you can see down here in the southern Sierra. That is likely a lightning ignition from earlier today. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then if we go further south here, we can see, of course, a couple of additional fires that are ongoing. It's hidden by cloud. There's actually some clouds over right now, but you can kind of see it poking through. That's the lake fire, the large fire burning in the remoter parts of interior Santa Barbara County. And then again, there's a new wildfire here. This is also new today. This is, I will take a look for the name in a moment, but this is another lightning spark fire, fire down in Baja as well. And then if we go look a little bit elsewhere in the west, we focus in, I'm not sure what we'll be able to see, but there are very active fires right now in Utah and this region that are covered by some active thunderstorms. And then again up in eastern Washington and up into the Snake River Valley. We see, actually I should probably zoom into Oregon because this is where some of the most apparent ones are. Two pair of large fires in central Oregon. So the point I really want to make here is that the wildfire level of activity has greatly increased in recent days, and with all the lightning, much of which is going to be dry lightning we're seeing right now, this is something that is going to become a significant concern later. I'm going to toggle over briefly to the Watch Duty app just to indicate where some of these fires are, these new ones. There's the lake fire, of course. That's been burning for days now, nearly 40,000 acres. That's going to be burning for a while now, but the ones I really wanted to direct people's attention to are these new fires. These are all lightning caused fires from this morning as far as I know. So there's the hurricane fire, that's burned about 1,000 acres, not immediately threatening anything. There's the soda fire, which it doesn't look huge. But then there's the white fire. This one looks like it is taking off and generating a pyrocumulus cloud. This one is quite zoomed in, so maybe I don't want that particular view here. But maybe there's a more zoomed out view. Yes, here's the zoomed out view of that fire. And what you can see, it's actually a little bit hard to tell now, but that's the fire, and it is generating a significant pyrocumulus cloud, and so that cloud could start to induce its own weather, and given the unstable conditions today, could even produce its own lightning, generating more fires. But there are some more dramatic camera views. These are additional fires that are burning. These are lightning fires in the southern Sierra and in the foothills ringing the southern half of the San Joaquin Valley, including eastern Santa Barbara County. This is a fire farther north. This is up near Sequoia, so this is in the high Sierra, southern Sierra. This is also a lightning sparked fire from today, and this one looks like it's gaining a pretty good head of steam as well in a fairly remote area. There aren't many resources on this yet, so this is one that's likely to go big. There's plenty of fuel. It's been very hot and dry, and it's in a quite remote area, so it's going to have some legs to it. This one, of course, looks like it does too. You can even see some pretty tall flame lengths in this camera view right now. Not too many new additional fires. By the way, that last one in the Sierra that I was talking about, this is the Trout fire, and it looks like it's remote enough they're going to be sending the smoke jumpers in. So just to give some perspective on where that is, yeah, that's quite high in elevation. That's way up there in the high Sierra in the wilderness. So there are limited options for suppression, and that does look like it's in between the gaps of some of the big fires in recent years. So that's going to have a lot of room to burn. I suspect we're going to be hearing about this particular fire for weeks to come, if not longer. Unless they happen to get a very localized, very fortuitously timed downpour today, which is possible but unlikely. And then even then, I think this one is likely going to be with us for a while, much as the lake fire has already been with us for a while, and the Shelley fire. So now we're starting to fill in the gaps. All of California is becoming very active. The concern for later today, though, is whether there might be additional lightning-sparked fires up the spine of the Sierra, and potentially up in Lake and interior Mendocino counties, where there are now red flag warnings in effect for the potential for dry lightning later today into tomorrow. In fact, there's a lot of California. Here, by the way, here's the Shelley fire now eclipsing 10,000 acres. This is the general setting in the Klamath National Forest. But look at all these regions in red. This is where red flag warnings are in effect for almost all of the Great Basin, actually, in Utah and Nevada and far eastern California, as well as almost the entire Sierra Nevada, the transverse ranges in Southern California, and then this pocket of interior northwestern California as well. All of this is due to dry lightning. It's not especially windy right now, and it's been hotter in recent days than it is today, but boy, is it bad timing to see a bunch of potential dry lightning. So one thing I want to now share, well actually, you know what, I'm going to go look at the comments first, answer some of these, and then I'm going to do a radar tour because there actually is a lot to see right now. So I'm going to transition back. You'll see my face for a moment while I answer these questions, and then I'll go back, do a radar tour of California, because there are active thunderstorms, including over some coastal areas, to talk about right now. Okay, so yes, yay lightning. I think that probably sums up a lot of people's feelings. You know, honestly, sometimes it is great to see. Yeah, these are rare days in California, and so for folks who like to cloud watch and weather watch, this summer monsoonal moisture incursions can be really interesting. But I think in recent years, especially during drought years or years that have been especially hot, this is not a drought year, but it has now been an exceptionally hot summer, and so we're starting to see wildfire conditions in some places behaving more as if we are in a drought. The gap between hydrometeorological drought and extreme vegetation dryness is an interesting topic for another day. But I think that people, have understandably become kind of fearful of these potential summer, especially dry lightning events, as we've seen in recent years sparked a lot of fires. It's important to note that not all of them result in big problems. There is some dry lightning every year in California, and there's almost always at least a handful of lightning-ignited fires. Some years this is a much bigger problem than other years. Unfortunately, this year looks like it's one of the years where the risks are a lot higher, given how dry and hot everything has been, and also given how moist and damp things were leading up to this very hot summer. Again, we've seen a lot of additional above-average growth of grass and flashy fuels in recent years because it has been so wet. And now all of that extra vegetation is essentially tinder dry. It's as dry as it gets. In fact, there are places in California that are suggesting that fine fuel moisture, as had been indicated, as well as some of these energy release variables, variables that quantify the potential energy in the combustion if vegetation were to catch on fire locally, are at record high levels right now. That follows what was not a dry year, so once again illustrating just how profound the effect of a warming and drying atmosphere can be, even if we get a lot of precipitation leading up to it. But the point being, fuels are very dry, in at least at low to mid elevations, so now it's creeping up the mountainside. I'd say that fuels as high as 5,000 or 6,000 feet are now quite receptive to lightning ignitions. It's now only right at the very high elevations, 8, 9, 10,000 feet, where there's still some protective effect from the residual moisture from this winter. So I think it's less likely we'll see lightning ignitions at very high elevations, but of course there's a lot more area below 5,000 feet in California than there is above. So that's still a significant concern. And there's, it is dry up even at high elevations now to support some level of wildfire activity, but perhaps not the intense level of activity that we're seeing still in grasses and brush and flashier fuels at lower elevations, which is where the primary risk still remains for now, although it is expanding as this heat wave continues up to higher and higher elevations, Lightning is not great because it's going to mean that you get these, it's kind of like randomly scattering those matches in the wilderness. They aren't necessarily occurring, unlike human ignitions, near roads or towns or campgrounds, and so they might be preferentially occurring in remote areas that are hard to access. And so in many cases, these lightning fires have a slight advantage in terms of taking off before resources can address them, because they're often quite remote, and they often ignite all at once. So you get a thunderstorm and you might have dozens of new starts all at once. You have to triage what you're able to respond to, partly on the basis of what resources are available, but also in terms of which fires can you actually access. And as we've seen with some of these new fires today, there are a limited number there's only so many air resources that can go out there, and some of them are in such remote places that you can't get ground resources in there to manage them, except via, for example, smoke jumping aircraft, which is what is being dispatched to some of these as we speak. So, as some folks have mentioned, there have been some brief rain showers today in different parts of California. There is some precipitation associated with some of these cells. In fact, there could even be brief downpours. These aren't completely dry storms in the same way that the extraordinary and pretty terrible August 2020 storms were. However, there definitely is dry lightning occurring, because some of these cells are just traditional dry cells where there's little or no precipitation reaching the ground at all, and there are cloud-to-ground lightning strikes reaching the ground. But other cells are a bit wetter. They are producing brief downpours, but some of the lightning strikes are occurring well outside of the narrow area that are getting those brief downpours, so the storms themselves may be quote-unquote wet thunderstorms, but they're still producing dry lightning strikes outside of the core, and because they're isolated, it's quite possible that places that see lightning but an adjacent wet thunderstorm won't actually see precipitation at that particular location, which is how some of these fires get going. So what we're seeing is a mix of wet and dry storms, but where both the wet and the dry storms are capable of producing dry lightning strikes. The wet storms in which case they're doing so by throwing bolts well outside of their rain cores. And in this kind of setup where we have these summer monsoonal moisture incursions, often it's difficult to tell which of these, if any, are going to produce lightning at lower elevations. So it's easier to get these thunderstorms in the mountains because the mountains themselves, the topographic lifting, can act as a trigger to release some of that latent atmospheric instability. And which events might produce lightning closer to the coast. Sometimes these events are very subtle. There's often enough moisture in place, mid-level moisture in the atmosphere and upper-level moisture. And there's even some instability today, but often it's unclear whether there'll be a trigger to give that the atmosphere that little initial nudge it needs to get those air parcels moving and to start becoming self-convecting to an extent that you get those deeper clouds capable of generating lightning. Today, unfortunately, it does look like the atmosphere, for whatever reason, is deciding that this is one of these events that is going to produce at least some lightning in coastal areas and lower elevations, despite what some of the models have shown. And this is a classic case where I think the Weather Service always struggles with this. There's most parts of California have had a 5 or 10% chance of thunderstorms in the forecast for this weekend all week, but that's below the threshold in which it gets mentioned verbally. It's just sort of thrown in there as an after, it's sort of as a low probability, high consequence situation, and that does actually appear to be occurring. So right now I'm fairly bullish. I actually think that there's likely to be somewhat more widespread lightning than are in the current forecasts, and a lot of that could be dry, because the farther west you go and the lower elevation you're at, the less likely you'd get rain at the surface. So this is a concern. I really would say that at least very isolated dry lightning strikes are possible anywhere in California, essentially, over the next 48 hours. It's more likely by far over the mountains, and more likely generally really south of the San Francisco Bay Area, where we already are seeing some such strikes. We definitely can't rule it out farther north, though, particularly in the northern mountains and in the northwestern mountains, but perhaps even in the Central Valley and in the coastal areas as well. I'll show you some places in a moment where that's already happening. Yeah, Zepp mentions that Reading did officially reach 119, but there were some observing sites that got up to 120 plus. Not surprising, and this is just something that I want to talk about in a future session about how, we are somewhat constrained by our official monitoring network. It's almost certain that some places are hotter as well as colder than the official observing sites, and so people sometimes argue that it wasn't this hot or it was even hotter at my house, and to a certain extent that may actually be true, but for apples to apples comparisons for long-term records, we really try and use the same equipment at the same site. That doesn't always happen, it's not always possible, but when we say that these records are being broken, it's relative to previous records, hopefully in the same place, so it actually does mean something. That Reading, even if other parts of Reading were above 119, that the particular site at which these measurements are taken had never reached that high temperature previously. So it's a record no matter how you slice it there. Marty Walters asks, the mid-July lightning events in 2020, the ones I was mentioning earlier, started literally hundreds of fires, some of which became catastrophic. How would you compare fuel moisture this week? Well, some of the lower elevation energy release components are even higher than they were in 2020 in Northern California. Believe it or not, there is even more potential energy in some of the vegetation at lower elevations, but the caveat is that the live fuel moisture and at the higher elevation fuel moisture is not as low at this point, because what we had in 2020 was a historically severe drought. So that was a record hot summer and in the middle of a historically severe drought. We've got another record hot summer, in fact, eclipsing even 2020 already up to this point, but the antecedent conditions were not nearly as dry. So what we've seen is very rapid drying of the kinds of vegetation and fuels that can dry very rapidly, but not all can. 1,000-hour fuels, the dead logs in the forest floor, for example, take a lot longer to dry out, and the live fuel moisture takes a lot longer to dry out. There's even still some green slopes north facing on high elevations in the Sierra, and even though they could potentially burn right now, given the level of flammability that they're seeing, up there it's not at record levels. So we could see fire behavior at lower elevations, especially in grass and brush and mixed woodland type regimes, just as intense, if not more so, as in 2020. We probably won't see that at the higher elevations and in the denser forests yet, but we are on track to get there. And one concern is that some of the fires that might ignite during this lightning event now, especially in remote areas, could burn for weeks or even months to come, right into the point of the season where we might well have conditions that are in some cases 2020-like. So this is a significant concern, and this is exactly what I've been talking about this season. There were a lot of folks predicting a mild fire season in California, and I just cannot for the life of me understand why. This includes some of the official predictive services, and I'm frankly frustrated with the fact that we just don't factor in a lot of sources that are doing these seasonal outlooks for wildfire all the information that's available at our disposal. This year it looked extremely likely that we'd see a slow start to fire season to begin with, slower even than average, with a rapid acceleration sometime during July or August, I believe I originally said, to well above average conditions and a pretty ominous looking peak sometime between August and October, depending on where you were. Right now, that's almost exactly what's happened to date. Now, we're only in the mid-July. I guess we can say we're in the middle of July now. So we'll see how the rest of the season goes. It's still remains to be seen. But right now, things don't look great in terms of the progression of fire season. Things really seem to be taking off, and not just in California, but in a broad region, not just in the western U.S. actually, but up in western Canada again, where fire season is in some spots second only to last year's record-breaking season already, and things are worsening. So there will be competition for resources, since the United States and Canada shares firefighting resources during the peak season, and there will be a lot of smoke blowing downwind. So this is going to be an issue not just for the western U.S., but also the central and eastern U.S., because they're going to get the smoke from western wildfires in the weeks to come, as has occurred in recent years as well. There's a comment that this summer reminds me of 2017 with an extreme heat, an early start to fire season following a wetter winter period and increased vegetation growth. I absolutely agree. In fact, I previously have mentioned that I think late summer and autumn 2017 is in some ways an analog for this year, because that year was the wettest winter on record in some parts of Northern California, followed by the hottest summer on record, and then followed by the driest vegetation and some of the worst, most destructive wildfires on record in Northern California. That last bit is not something I'm willing to prognosticate on, because that has to do with a lot of things other than just the weather and the antecedent field conditions. But from a vegetation perspective and from a climate perspective, I do think there are some strong parallels to 2017, except that it's already hotter and drier at this point in the year than it was in 2017. The parallel being that there was a lot of extra vegetation growth that year leading into the season. But yes, I think that is a parallel that I would draw. Okay, so I want to go on a bit of a radar tour, because there are some thunderstorms already out there. So now I'm going to share, this is the Radar Scope app. If I can find it, here it is. Oh, I need to, there we go. Okay. So what you're seeing on screen now is, once it appears, be just a minute here, drum roll please. This is the current radar out of Vandenberg, which is on the central coast. There's a few things I want to show. First, I'm going to zoom in. What you can see, and I'm going to use my radar drawing tool here, you see these high-based thunderstorms that have developed over the Southern California Bight, so over the ocean and up into the transverse ranges. What you can see in this region broadly is there are cloud-to-ground, whoops, I need to stop doing that. There are cloud-to-ground lightning strikes, or in this case, cloud-to-water lightning strikes in this cluster out over the open ocean, I guess in the Channel Islands. So there could be actually some, it's actually possible there could be some lightning fires on the Channel Islands, which would be interesting, although there is actually a marine layer underneath this. So this is an unstable, elevated instability layer above a stable marine inversion right now. That occasionally happens, which is interesting. But the more consequential lightning, as you can see, there have recently been, earlier today, strikes up in this area, and now you're starting to see some again, just up into the mountains from Ojai. These are mostly dry strikes. There isn't great radar coverage in this region, but there's another strike since I've been talking. So it's very possible we'll see new lightning ignited fires up here. We already have a few fires in this region today from lightning earlier, but I think that there may yet be more to come, potentially sort of, given that there's lightning offshore really anywhere sort of in this vicinity, the Central Coast is going to be under the gun. Not everyone's going to see lightning. These storms are scattered or even isolated, but there could be dry strikes anywhere within this region in the next couple of hours, and that could be a real problem. But and I also want to zoom out for a moment. I have placed this. This is the fire weather product from the Storm Prediction Center, and this line, this outermost line, is the region where the SPC highlighted as at the highest risk for dry lightning during this event. So you can see it's a broad part of the west, including some lower elevation parts of California. But as we're already seeing right now, there's already lightning occurring west of this region, and so I think this was an underestimate. I actually think it's quite possible that we could see some lightning filling in the rest of California. So this is sort of why I'm saying that there could be lightning, much of which would be dry almost anywhere. Not a lot, I would suspect, but enough to cause problems because we're already seeing fire ignitions. Again, as I'm speaking, there's new storms going up along the eastern Sierra down here. So again, associated with brief downpours, but as you can see, there are some strikes occurring, like this one, outside of rain cores. And these strikes, too, are occurring ahead of the rain core. So I think there will be more fires to come. And the other thing I wanted to point out is this is a broad region of dry lightning potential. There could be lightning sparked fires in this whole region over the next 48 hours, so it's going to get active fast. Okay, so if I let me go to San Francisco radar. Now, you're still seeing that dry lightning region highlighted. I'm going to get rid of that because, let me just decide which of these I need to get rid of. Okay, well, I just need to change the settings there. I'm not as familiar with this part of the app because there aren't as often things to show. Anyway, I'll just leave that up for now. Just trying to see if there's a quick. Okay, I'll deal with that later. Anyway, from the San Francisco radar, we can see from a great distance these showers and thunderstorms popping up over the central coast. They're elevated, so even from that distance, they don't look like they're producing much rain hitting the ground. There are stronger echoes showing up over here from the San Francisco radar, interestingly. So there are some localized heavier downpours in here, as I mentioned, but there are dry strikes occurring as well. Here, it's clear there's more storms up by Bridgeport, Eastern Sierra, lots of strikes there, probably some towers going up near South Lake Tahoe. And then there are showers, high base showers up farther north, so even off the Mendocino coast, up in the northern Sacramento Valley. I don't think these are producing lightning yet, but there is at least a chance that they could later. It's more likely they'll be virga, meaning rain showers that evaporate before reaching the ground. And if I zoom out, I do think that the risk of, again, this is sort of east of this line is where the SPC is highlighted the greatest risk of dry lightning. I personally think that there is some risk that's a lot higher than indicated in this region as well. So mainly Central Coast, under the gun the next few hours. But there is at least a 10 or 20% chance that we get some up here in the next 48 hours, potentially going into tomorrow, particularly up here in this region. In the northwestern mountains where that red flag warning is currently in effect for the potential for lightning. So can't rule it out anywhere. It's probably the least likely in the San Francisco Bay Area, but definitely not impossible. This is one of those days where there's a 10 or 20% chance. But down here, there's more like a 30 to 50% chance, so that's more significant. And in this region, there very likely will be some dry lightning to contend with in California. So this is the concern. I'll go back to Vandenberg because this is the most active, interesting radar right now because there's both lightning in coastal regions as well as inland, and we're seeing these cells continuing without a whole lot of precipitation. Maybe if I go to the Los Angeles radar, we'll get a slightly different view of these. And again, what we see is that there could even be some localized downpours with these offshore. But these cells over land are definitely generating some dry strikes. So this radar screen may become more active later because you can see that there are clusters developing. There's this cluster offshore. There's a few strikes over land right now. There's a cluster down the desert, local downpours, more lightning here. There's also some up here off the map. And then there will, so there's a number of areas that are of interest. Some of these, of course, at more risk of lightning ignitions than others right now. But the risk is there following this heat wave, because especially in places that overlap with extreme heat. So this region here, the coastal zone where, the majority of California's population lives, has not been as exceptionally hot recently as everywhere else. So I can also carve out another region right along the immediate coast here, where everything west of about that line has not been exceptionally hot recently in California. So the risk of lightning ignition along the immediate coastal area is probably lower. But even if you go just a little bit inland, the rest of this region, though, is this whole region inland from about east of that line all the way into the Great Basin has been record hot. And I'm not kidding. I literally mean record hot for the past 2 weeks. These areas now have tinder dry grass and brush that are ready to go. And, when we see lightning strikes like this, and like this, and perhaps even in the desert, because this has been a relatively wet year, there is a significant concern. But my personal concern remains greatest for lightning conditions. Maybe I'll draw it out on a map just to be really clear. I got to zoom because it's a big region. My personal concern for lightning conditions over the next 48 hours is highest essentially in this region that I'm personally outlining here, and then kind of maybe carve out for northwestern California. So I'm not going to draw an eastern boundary, but something, everything east of this line, which includes a lot of California's forests and all the Sierra Nevada and parts of the Coast Ranges in central California. Potential for lightning ignitions from dry or mixed wet and dry storms following a record-breaking heat wave, and before there might be yet another wave of heat to come. Not zero risk west of that line, but I do think it's less. So that's my current thought right here as to what's going on. Let me jump back over to the comments and see what people are taking a look at now. Okay, so you'll see me again as I respond. Okay. Yes, I know there's a number of folks who are sort of biting their nails with a pattern like this, and again, it's important to remember that August of 2020 was a really exceptional event. Incredible combination of just horrifyingly hot and dry, severe drought, and then an incredibly intense outbreak of dry thunderstorms over the Bay Area, especially, that moved northward. That kind of setup is very unlikely. On the other hand, we do now have the legacy of this extreme heat wave that puts us in a position of elevated risk if and when there is dry lightning, and there is ongoing dry lightning right now with multiple fire ignitions that are taking off. So the proof is in the pudding, as they say. It's clearly a receptive environment for lightning fires, because that is actually what we're seeing already today. Yes, and other folks have mentioned that the potential for thunderstorm activity near existing large fires is always a hazard for firefighters, and for having blowouts, having fires that have erratic and extreme localized behavior when those cells move overhead or nearby or produce gusty downdraft winds. That can be really hard to predict in advance, and that has caused many problems over the years on existing fires as well. Mark mentions, I was in California this past week. I gave a talk at the Marin Wildfire Authority in San Rafael, and then also a separate talk on atmospheric rivers and flood risk in California at the California Extreme Precipitation Symposium, both of which are talks that I think will become available. The Marin Wildfire talk, I believe, is already available on YouTube, although I think I need to tell those folks to change their sharing settings. I think it's marked as a video made for kids. It actually means it's not shareable. So once that's available, I may share it. By the way, at the end of every live stream, I embed a link to my public talks playlist on YouTube. Every public talk that I give that is recorded and uploaded to YouTube, I add to that list, so you can see these over the years. By the way, if I've ever missed one that's uploaded, often I'm not told when they're uploaded or what channel they're on. I just have to do periodic sweeps manually. If you're aware of a talk that I gave that's on YouTube, and that's not on that playlist that I add to the end of each session, please let me know and I will add it. Additionally, I will add the Marin Wildfire talk once it becomes shareable, and hopefully the California Extreme Precipitation Symposium talk as well at that time. All right. Well, I think I'm gonna call it a session today, end a little bit early because this was a weekend pop-up. Hopefully the message is out there. There is some significant risk from this dry or mixed dry and wet lightning event. Wildfire season is taking off. The heat, although there will be a reprieve this week, is not over, In fact, there are already signs it's coming back later in July, which could be a problem, of course, both for human health, heat-related impacts, and for the wildfire situation, which is likely to be worse after this lightning event than before. And again, a reminder that wildfire season is really taking off not just in California, but across the western U.S. and western Canada, with lots of new ignitions possible from lightning over the next few days, followed by more extreme heat in the weeks to come. That is a bad combination, and we're going to be talking a lot more about wildfire in the days and weeks to come, which is essentially consistent with my seasonal prediction that we'd see a slow start but a very rapid acceleration in July or August, with much above average wildfire activity by late summer, so August into September. That remains my prediction as to what's going to happen next, is continued escalation in most places, peaking not until September or even October in more coastal regions. So that's the scoop. Your mileage may vary in terms of lightning likelihood today, but there is at least a slight chance. And by slight chance, I do mean in some cases on the low end, 5 or 10%, say in the coastal Bay Area, but as high as 40 or 50% along some parts of the Central Coast, as well as parts of the northern Sacramento Valley and southern San Joaquin Valley. In the mountains, it's higher. The Sierra will likely see some lightning, already is in some spots, as well as the northern and northwestern mountains, not quite as likely as the Sierra, but definitely elevated likelihood and elevated fire risk stemming from that. Anyway, stay cool, enjoy the reprieve in the heat, but stay safe out there if there is lightning, and in particular if there's lightning-sparked fires, which there are already a few of these around, and I would be pretty surprised if there weren't more of them by tomorrow. Until next time, I may have a pop-up session unexpectedly at some point, depending on how things develop, but otherwise I'll schedule regularly a more advanced warning type session sometime later this week, TBD. Talk to you all later.